Most people think they know the Ozarks, a few lakes, some hills, cheap land and friendly people. But the real Ozarks, with its geology and history and economy and shadows, is almost nothing like that image. Some of what is true about this region sounds invented. Here are 35 facts about the Ozarks that are real, documented, and almost impossible to believe. The Ozarks are not mountains, not geologically, not technically, not by any serious scientific definition. They are an eroded plateau, a vast tableland that water and time have carved into something that resembles highlands. The flat ridgetops, the deep hollows, the rivers cutting through valley floors, all of it is plateau behavior. The Ozarks look like mountains. They are not. The Ozarks are older than almost everything you have ever stood on. The bedrock beneath the region is some of the most ancient exposed rock in the interior of North America. It is Precambrian granite and dolomite, formed over 1 billion years ago. The Appalachians are geological teenagers by comparison. The Ozarks have been slowly stripped down by weather and water since before complex life existed on this planet. Lake of the Ozarks does not exist in nature. The entire lake was created in 1931 when Bagnell Dam was built across the Osage River, making it completely man-made. Before the water rose, the land beneath it was farmland, forest, and occupied towns. Not all of those communities were fully cleared before the flooding began. The lake is beautiful. It is also, in a real sense, built on top of something that was deliberately erased. Lake of the Ozarks has more miles of shoreline than the entire coast of California. The lake's cove-heavy shape gives it roughly 1,150 miles of shoreline. California's Pacific coastline runs about 840 miles. This is not regional boasting. It is a consequence of flooding a deeply folded river valley where every fold became a cove. The number sounds wrong, but it is not. The Ozarks sit above one of the most significant freshwater systems in the American interior. The Ozark aquifer filters clean, cold water through thousands of feet of limestone and dolomite, feeding springs, rivers, and wells across the region. In an era when fresh water is increasingly treated as a strategic resource, the Ozarks sit on a resource that may eventually be worth more than anything else beneath them. Branson, Missouri has more theater seats than Broadway. The small Ozark city, population under 15,000, hosts a concentration of live entertainment venues that outpaces New York's entire theater district in raw seating capacity. This happened because a specific audience, older, middle American, conservative Christian, was ignored by mainstream entertainment, and Branson built an entire economy around being the place that showed up for them. The English dialect spoken in deep Ozarks communities is considered one of the closest surviving relatives of Elizabethan English. Linguists have documented speech patterns and vocabulary in isolated hollows that trace directly to the English spoken in the 1600s. Words Shakespeare used are still in active circulation in parts of the Ozarks today. The region's isolation preserved a language that otherwise disappeared centuries ago. The word Ozark almost certainly comes from French, not from any Native American language. French traders used the phrase aux arc, meaning toward the Arkansas, as a shorthand for the region. Over generations, the pronunciation shifted, and the spelling followed. The Ozarks are named after a direction. It was a French directional that American settlers heard, misunderstood, and wrote down phonetically until it became the name of a landscape. The Ozarks have more freshwater springs per square mile than almost any comparable region in North America. The limestone bedrock is shot through with fractures and conduits, which funnel groundwater to the surface constantly. Thousands of named springs exist across the region. Dozens discharge enough water every day to supply a small city. The Ozarks produce clean, cold water the way oil fields produce crude. Most people drive through it without knowing. Big Spring in Carter County, Missouri is one of the largest single-outlet springs in the United States. On an average day, it discharges around 276 million gallons. In flood conditions, that number has exceeded 800 million gallons in a single day. For context, New York City uses roughly 1 billion gallons daily for its entire population. Big Spring sits in the Missouri Ozarks, doing something extraordinary, mostly in silence. The Ozarks have more species of freshwater fish than virtually any landlocked region of comparable size in the world. The cold, spring-fed streams support extraordinary biodiversity, including several species found nowhere else on Earth. Conservation biologists have ranked the region among the most important freshwater ecosystems in North America. Most people know it as a good place to go bass fishing. That's roughly equivalent to knowing Paris as a nice place to get a croissant. Float fishing, drifting downriver in a small boat, was essentially invented in the Ozarks. The practice developed in the late 1800s as a specific adaptation to rivers that were too rocky and too shallow for traditional boats, but perfectly suited to flat-bottomed john boats. The technique spread outward from the Ozarks across American fishing culture. A method born from terrain-specific necessity in the Missouri hills is now a standard recreational practice nationwide. The Buffalo National River in Arkansas was America's first nationally protected river. Congress designated it in 1972 before any template for such a designation existed. The Buffalo runs entirely free, no dams, no diversions, for 135 miles through the Arkansas Ozarks. Getting that designation required defeating a proposed dam that would have flooded one of the most beautiful river valleys in the country. Most Americans have never heard of it. The Tri-State Mining District centered around Joplin, Missouri, once produced more lead and zinc than any comparable area on Earth. The ore was so concentrated and accessible that the region powered American industrialization for decades. When the ore ran out, the companies left immediately, taking the jobs and leaving behind a community with nothing. A federal Superfund site remains, and it is still being remediated today. Missouri alone has over 6,000 documented caves. Some are world famous. Others have never been fully explored. The underlying limestone dissolves slowly in acidic groundwater, creating passages, chambers, and underground rivers that map the hidden architecture of the region. The Ozarks you can see above ground are only part of what the Ozarks actually are. The rest is underneath. If you're this far in, you're exactly who this channel was built for. Subscribe if you haven't, and keep watching. We're halfway through, and it gets stranger from here. Marvel Cave, beneath Silver Dollar City in Branson, was originally mined for bat guano. In the 1800s, guano was a significant source of saltpeter for gunpowder. The cave was excavated not for its extraordinary geological beauty, but because it had bats. The mining failed. The cave was later turned into a tourist attraction, and Silver Dollar City was built around its entrance. The most visited destination in the Ozarks started as a failed guano mine. The Trail of Tears passed through the Ozarks. The forced removal of the Cherokee, Choctaw, Creek, Chickasaw, and Seminole nations in the 1830s was routed through Missouri and Arkansas. The terrain was brutal. The winter of 1838 was severe, and the Ozarks portion of the journey was among the most lethal. Sites where people died or were buried remain largely unmarked. The Ozarks hold a geography of American grief that almost no one acknowledges. The Ozarks' topography made it structurally resistant to the plantation system, which shaped its Civil War allegiances. The hills couldn't support large-scale cotton agriculture. Without cotton, there was less economic incentive for enslaved labor, and without that system, the region developed a different political identity, with significant Unionist sentiment in areas the rest of the South assumed were Confederate. The terrain didn't just look different, it created different politics. Some Ozarks communities did not receive electricity until the 1950s. The Rural Electrification Act was supposed to bring power to rural America after 1936, but scattered population and difficult terrain meant some hollows were simply skipped. People who were already alive when the Wright brothers flew were raising children in the Ozarks by lamplight into the middle of the 20th century. The isolation was not romantic. It was structural, and it built a culture of self-reliance that still runs through the region. During Prohibition, the Ozarks was one of the most prolific moonshine-producing regions in the United States. The terrain was ideal, with remote hollows, spring-fed water for mash, timber for fuel, and a population deeply accustomed to federal authorities being unwelcome. The tradition predated Prohibition and survived repeal. Ozark's moonshine culture was a parallel economy, a form of resistance, and a technical tradition with its own standards of quality, passed across generations. Mark Twain was born in the Ozarks. His birthplace, Florida, Missouri, sits in Monroe County at the northern edge of the region. Twain left as an infant and spent almost none of his life there, but the landscapes he wrote about, the rivers, the bluffs, the small river towns, drew from a Missouri consciousness partly shaped by where he started. The most distinctly American writer in history began in a two-room cabin in a region most literary histories barely mention. The Ozarks have one of the highest rates of multi-generational land ownership in the United States. Family parcels held by the same family for 4 or 5 generations are common in the rural core. This is economically unusual. Most rural American land has been consolidated or subdivided multiple times over the same period. The Ozarks' relative poverty and geographic isolation kept land prices low enough that there was little pressure to sell. That era is ending. Outside investors began quietly buying Ozarks land in significant volume around 2018, accelerating sharply through 2020 and 2021. They are limited liability companies, land investment companies, and entities tied to larger institutional funds, buying timber, recreational ground, waterfront, and agricultural parcels. Local families who sell often cannot know who the ultimate buyer is. The deed shows a limited liability company. What is behind that company is deliberately harder to trace. Land prices in certain Ozarks counties increased by 40% or more between 2020 and 2024. 4 years, 40%. In a region defined for decades by affordability, that shift carries generational implications. People who grew up assuming the land was there to be bought when they were ready are discovering the window has moved, and in some corridors, it is already closed permanently. The Ozark National Forest in Arkansas covers over 1.2 million acres, a vast area larger than the state of Rhode Island. It is one of the largest national forests east of the Rockies and contains some of the most rugged, least visited wilderness in the central United States. Elk were reintroduced here in 1981 after being absent for over a century. Large sections have no cell service, no trails, and no infrastructure. It is genuinely wild in ways that most Americans have never experienced. The Ozarks contain more species of salamander than any other region in North America. That remarkable diversity comes from the same cold, oxygen-rich springs that support exceptional fish life. Those springs have made the Ozarks a refuge for many amphibians, including the hellbender, North America's largest salamander, which can grow to nearly 3 feet long. Hellbenders require pristine water to survive. Their continued presence in Ozark streams is, among other things, a water quality indicator. Where you find hellbenders, the water is genuinely clean. The Ozarks experience a meteorological phenomenon called cold air pooling, where frigid air sinks into valleys and becomes trapped by terrain. On clear nights, valley temperatures can be 20 or 30 degrees colder than nearby ridges. This creates microclimates so distinct that crops that grow on a ridgetop will fail in the hollow below it. The terrain does not just look different, it creates its own weather, independent of everything around it. The Ozarks have a significant German immigrant heritage that is almost entirely invisible in the region's public identity. In the mid-1800s, German immigrants settled throughout Missouri and into the Ozarks, bringing winemaking, specific agricultural practices, and a cultural identity that quietly shaped towns, churches, and family names still present today. The Ozarks are publicly imagined as Scots-Irish and Anglo-Appalachian. The German layer is real, documented, and almost never discussed. The Ozarks' waterfalls are essentially absent from national consciousness, despite being genuinely exceptional. The Arkansas Ozarks contain dozens of significant falls tucked into sandstone bluffs and limestone gorges, some dropping 60 or 70 feet. Most have no parking lot, no signage, and no visibility. They require a hike, a willingness to get wet, and an ability to read a map. That barrier has kept them both pristine and unknown for most of their existence. The Ozarks region has a higher rate of self-employment than almost any other rural area in the United States. The tradition runs deep, built from a culture that could not rely on large employers and that learned to construct economic lives from what the land and the local market could support. That cultural inheritance now intersects with remote work in interesting ways. A region that built self-employment out of necessity is now attractive to people choosing it by preference. The combined water system of Table Rock Lake, Lake Taneycomo, and Lake of the Ozarks is one of the most engineered inland water systems in the American interior. The Army Corps of Engineers and private utilities built a cascading series of dams, regulating flood control, hydroelectric generation, and water supply across a massive watershed. Lake Taneycomo is kept near 40 degrees year-round by water released from the depths of Table Rock above it, supporting a blue ribbon trout fishery in the middle of Missouri. The Ozarks have a concentration of independent craft producers, musicians, woodworkers, potters, distillers, and furniture makers that is unusual for a rural region of its size. The tradition predates the modern artisan economy movement by generations. What changed is the internet. People who once made things for a local market of a few hundred can now reach customers across the country. The Ozarks craft economy is growing in ways that regional economic data does not fully capture yet. There are entire towns submerged beneath the Ozarks lakes. When Table Rock Lake was filled, communities were permanently covered. Residents had weeks to relocate. They moved churches, exhumed cemeteries, and watched their homes disappear. In dry years, when lake levels drop, remnants of foundations and fence lines briefly resurface. The Ozarks lakes that tourists come to swim in are built on top of inhabited land that was deliberately flooded within living memory. The Ozarks were largely avoided by major Native American civilizations as a permanent settlement zone, not because the land was inhospitable, but because the terrain made large-scale agriculture difficult, and because the region functioned as a buffer between competing tribal territories. When European settlers arrived, they encountered a landscape with significant natural resources and a population density far lower than surrounding regions. The Ozarks' emptiness was strategic, on multiple sides, across multiple centuries. The Ozarks may be the most consistently misread major American region still operating in the 21st century. Economically underestimated, geologically misidentified, and culturally caricatured, the region has managed to hold real value, real history, and real complexity behind an image most outsiders never bother to look past. That is changing now, whether the Ozarks wants it to or not. The people buying the land have already done their reading. The question is whether the people who live there understand how much the math has already shifted. That's 35 facts about the Ozarks that are documented, verified, and built to stop you mid-scroll. Drop a comment below. Which one hit hardest? Which one are you calling fake until you look it up? That's the whole point. The Ozarks do not need to be exaggerated. The truth is already doing the work. Subscribe if this is the kind of content you are here for. We are not done with this region.